The cold November wind blew the fallen leaves through the deserted streets of River Creek, a small town in Iowa. The gray sky loomed over the town, as if it were a portent of trouble. Latricia Dawson adjusted the collar of her coat and quickened her pace. She didn't want to be late for work, especially today, when they were expecting an addition to the station, a shipment of new prisoners from a neighboring county. Latricia had been working in the police station office for 17 years. 17 long years amidst papers, reports, and monotonous routine. She knew every crack in the walls of the old station building, every creaking floorboard. Everything here was familiar and predictable, like her whole life in recent years. As she crossed the threshold of the station, Latricia smelled a familiar odor, a mixture of old paper, coffee, and disinfectant. She nodded to the officer on duty, hung her coat on the coat rack, and made her way to her desk. "Good morning, Latricia." Chantel Bannister, her co-worker and only friend in this backwater, greeted her. "Good morning, if you can call it that," Latricia replied, sinking tiredly into her chair. Chantel looked at her carefully. "You haven't slept again? Did Jarvis stay up late again?" Latricia only nodded, not wanting to go into details. Her husband, Sheriff Jarvis Hampton, had practically lived on the job for the past few months. His obsession with the service and fighting crime had gotten to the point where he was only home to sleep for a few hours, shower, and leave again. Their marriage, once full of love and understanding, had become a lifeless formality. "They're bringing in new ones today," Chantel changed the subject. "They say there are some real thugs among them." "I don't care about that," Latricia shrugged her shoulders. "My job is to fill out the paperwork correctly and get it into the system. The rest is up to Jarvis and his men." At that moment, the door of the station opened and a convoy of detainees entered the room. 5 men in handcuffs, escorted by 3 officers. Latricia involuntarily raised her eyes from the papers and met her gaze with one of the prisoners. A tall, slender man with expressive cheekbones and a defiant look. Unlike the others, he didn't look depressed or angry. Rather, there was a challenge and a strange confidence in his eyes. When their eyes met, he smiled faintly, which sent an involuntary shiver down Latricia's spine. "Chantel," she asked quietly, "what's going to happen to these?" "Most are being held for minor offenses, soon to be out on bail. And that tall one over there," Chantel nodded toward the man who had caught Latricia's attention, "looks like robbery to me. Dexter Rochon is his name. They say it's not the first time he's been caught." Latricia looked at Dexter again. It was as if he sensed her gaze and looked in her direction again. This time his smile was more open. Latricia quickly lowered her eyes, feeling the blood rush to her face. "Latricia, are you okay?" Chantel asked, noticing her embarrassment. "Yeah, it's stuffy in here," Latricia lied, opening the window. Cold air rushed in, refreshing the musty atmosphere of the grounds. The day dragged on slowly as Latricia filled out endless forms, entering detainee data into the system. When it came to Dexter Rochon, she lingered on his case a little longer than usual. 25 years old, previous conviction for petty theft, now accused of shoplifting, no family, no permanent residence, typical of River Creek's disadvantaged youth. Toward evening, when most of the staff had dispersed, Latricia went down to the basement where the holding cells were located. She told herself she just wanted to see if the paperwork was in order, but deep down, she knew that was not what drew her there. Dexter was sitting on the edge of his bunk, leafing through a tattered book. When he heard footsteps, he looked up and smiled when he saw Latricia. "Good evening, Mrs." He paused, looking at the badge on her chest. "Dawson." "Hampton," Latricia corrected him. "Dawson is my maiden name. I'm the wife of the Sheriff of Hampton." Dexter whistled. "The sheriff's wife has honored me with a visit. To what do I owe the honor?" "Just making sure the paperwork's in order," Latricia replied dryly, trying to keep her tone professional. "There's nothing wrong with the paperwork." He put the book aside and walked over to the bars. "I'm a little short on company. Would you keep me company for a few minutes?" Latricia knew she had to leave, that she shouldn't have a conversation with a prisoner, especially one-on-one. But something in his eyes, in his voice, held her in place. "Do you have any problems? Complaints about the conditions of confinement?" she asked, trying to make the conversation official again. Dexter laughed. "My only problem is that a beautiful woman like you is married to a man who apparently doesn't value his happiness." "What do you mean by that?" Latricia frowned, but something niggled inside. What I mean, Dexter lowered his voice to an intimate whisper, is that if I had a wife like that, I wouldn't leave her wandering the grounds alone late at night, especially when there are so many dangerous men around. Latricia felt goosebumps run up her spine. Dexter was right. Jarvis had stayed late at work again without even calling her. He was out there somewhere in the city, chasing criminals and doing his duty, while she spent her evenings alone in an empty house or at work. "You know nothing about me," she said sharply, backing away from the bars. "But I'd like to know." His eyes wouldn't let her go. "It seems to me that we are both lacking in understanding. Don't you think so, Mrs. Hampton?" Latricia turned and walked quickly toward the exit. Her heart was pounding like she'd run a mile. What was this? A routine flirtation by an inmate trying to manipulate her, or something more? The familiar silence greeted her at home. Jarvis hadn't even left a note. Latricia mechanically heated dinner, ate alone, stared out the dark window, and went to bed. But sleep would not come. Dexter Rochon's face stood before her eyes, and his words echoed in her head. The next day, Latricia went down to the basement again. And the next. Their conversations grew longer and more frank. Dexter told her about his life, about his childhood without parents, about the years he'd spent in foster homes, about the dreams he'd never realized. Latricia listened, at first warily, then with genuine interest, then with sympathy. "You know," he said one evening as they sat on opposite sides of the bars, "sometimes I think we are alike." "In what way?" Latricia was surprised. "I've never been in jail or robbed a store." "We're both in a cage," Dexter answered gravely. "I am in this one," he tapped the iron bars, "and you are in your marriage, in this city, in a life that has long since ceased to bring you joy." Latricia wanted to object, to say that he was wrong, that her marriage to Jarvis was her choice and her happiness. But the words stuck in her throat. Because Dexter was right. Her life had long ago become a cage from which she saw no way out. That night, the first time they'd kissed through the bars of the cell, Latricia had realized she'd crossed a line beyond which there was no turning back. It had been a brief, almost weightless kiss, but it had turned her life upside down. "I'll be out of here soon," Dexter whispered, not letting go of her hand. "My lawyer says bail will be posted the other day. Then we can see each other for real." Latricia nodded, unable to utter a word. Part of her was horrified at what was happening, while the other, stronger part of her was eager for it to continue. 3 days later, Dexter was released on bail. Latricia watched him walk out of the station, proud, free, with the same cocky smile on his lips. As he passed her desk, he winked discreetly at her and slipped a small note with a phone number into her pocket. Their first meeting outside the precinct was at a small motel on the outskirts of town. Latricia had lied to Jarvis, saying she was on her way to visit an ailing aunt in a neighboring town. Her husband only nodded absent-mindedly, immersed in his own thoughts and business. In the motel room, cheap and impersonal, Latricia felt alive for the first time in years. Dexter was tender and passionate at the same time, his hands and lips making her body tremble and her heart beat faster. Afterward, lying in his arms, she cried from happiness, from fear, from the realization that she was betraying the man who had once been her whole life. "Don't cry," Dexter whispered, kissing her tear-wet cheeks. "You deserve to be happy. We both do." Their secret meetings continued. Once a week, sometimes more often, they met in a motel, in an abandoned house on the outskirts of town, in Latricia's car on a deserted road each time. She promised herself that it was the last time, that she would end this crazy affair. And each time she returned to him, unable to resist the attraction. Jarvis didn't notice, or pretended not to. He was too busy with his job, his criminals, his duty. Latricia had become to him something like a piece of furniture, familiar, comfortable, but without any emotion. One evening, returning home after another meeting with Dexter, Latricia found her husband at home. It was so unexpected that she froze in the doorway, not knowing what to say. "Jarvis, you're early today." The sheriff was sitting at the kitchen table, a file folder in front of him. He looked up at his wife tiredly. "We've got a problem, Latricia. There's a new gang of drug dealers in town. They're getting more and more brazen. Today, they killed a witness right on his doorstep." Latricia nodded mechanically, relieved that the conversation was about work and not about her strange behavior lately. "You look tired," Jarvis said, looking at her carefully. "Is everything all right?" "Yeah, just..." A lot of work, she lied, averting her eyes. Have you had dinner? Jarvis shook his head. No time. I just stopped by to pick up some paperwork. I have to get back to the station. When he left, Latricia sank into a chair and covered her face with her hands. What was she doing? Where is her life going? But even in that moment of realization, she knew she wouldn't stop. Dexter had become a drug she couldn't and wouldn't give up. At the police station, the atmosphere was becoming increasingly tense. The murder of a witness had shaken the entire city. Jarvis was on the job day and night, coordinating the investigation. Marcus Traeger, his deputy, stopped by Latricia's office several times a day, asking her to prepare certain documents. The sheriff's on edge, he said one day, sitting down on the edge of her desk. I've never seen him so obsessed. He's always like that when it comes to his job. Marcus paused, looking at her. You know, I've been meaning to say for a while. If you need help or just to talk, I'm always here for you. Latricia looked up at him in surprise. Marcus's eyes were filled with genuine concern and something else she couldn't or didn't want to recognize. Thank you, Marcus, but I'm fine. Are you? He leaned in a little closer. Because lately you've been different. It's like something's been eating you up inside. I'm just tired. Latricia pulled back, putting distance between them. We all are. Marcus nodded, but there was doubt in his eyes. If you need me, you know where to find me. After he left, Latricia pulled out her cell phone and texted Dexter a quick message. Can't tonight. Too dangerous. The reply came almost instantly. I missed you. Tomorrow? She closed her eyes, visualizing his face, his hands, his lips. Tomorrow, she wrote, feeling her heart begin to beat more frequently at the mere thought of their upcoming meeting. The next day, Dexter proposed something crazy. Let's meet at your house. What? Latricia nearly dropped her phone. Are you crazy? It's the sheriff's house. That's exactly why, Dexter said with a chuckle. It's so, exciting. Besides, it's safer. No one will see your car at the motel. No one will see us together. What if Jarvis comes home early? He never comes home early. You said so yourself. A few hours, Latricia. Just a few hours alone, in a normal environment, not these cheap motels. She should have said no. She should have said no and ended this crazy relationship before it was too late. But instead, she heard her own voice. Okay, tomorrow at 6. Jarvis will be in a meeting in a neighboring county. As she hung up the phone, Latricia felt a strange sensation spread through her body, a mixture of fear, excitement, and some kind of dark foreboding. Chantel, noticing her condition, came to her desk. Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine. Latricia tried to smile. Just a lot on my mind. About Jarvis. Chantel nodded understandingly. He'd been driving himself crazy with this investigation. Yes, about Jarvis. Latricia lied, feeling a prick of conscience. She hadn't thought of her husband in a long time, except with guilt or annoyance. When she returned home that evening, she found Jarvis in the kitchen. He was sitting at the table, staring at one point, a bottle of whiskey and an almost empty glass in front of him. Jarvis, she called out cautiously. What's wrong? The sheriff raised reddened eyes to her. We lost another witness, right under our noses. I should have seen it coming. Should have protected. Latricia walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. You can't save everyone, Jarvis. You're doing the best you can. He grinned bitterly. Apparently, my strength is not enough. He looked at her for a long moment. I miss us, Latricia, the way things used to be. We seem to have drifted apart. Latricia's heart clenched with pain and guilt. In that moment, she saw him not as a sheriff, not as an estranged husband, but as the man she had once dreamed of spending her life with. The man she was now betraying in the cruelest way possible. I miss him too, she said quietly. And it was true. She missed the old Jarvis, their love, their happiness. But that Jarvis had disappeared long ago, dissolved into work, into chasing criminals, into endless investigations. Maybe we should take a vacation, he suggested, taking her hand. Go somewhere, just you and me. Remember what it was like to be together. Latricia felt tears coming to her eyes. Maybe, when the investigation is over. Yes, when the investigation is over, Jarvis echoed, bitterness in his voice. They both knew the investigation would never end. There would always be a new case, a new criminal, a new chase. That night, Jarvis stayed home. They lay in the same bed, but there was a gulf between them that could no longer be bridged. Latricia could not sleep for a long time, listening to the steady breathing of her husband and thinking that tomorrow in this very bed she would be lying with another man. In the morning, Jarvis left early as usual. Before he left, he kissed her forehead, a gesture that had once been filled with tenderness, but was now a mere formality. "There's a meeting in a neighboring county today," he reminded her. "I'll be back late, so don't wait up." Latricia nodded, unable to look him in the eye. All day at work, she couldn't concentrate. Her thoughts kept returning to her upcoming meeting with Dexter, to what they would do in her house, in her bed. Guilt mixed with anticipation, creating a rattling mixture inside her that threatened to explode at any moment. Chantel had asked several times if everything was all right, but Latricia had given her a generalized answer. Only Marcus, passing by her desk, stayed longer than usual, looking at her carefully. "You seem tense today," he said. "I'm just tired." Latricia dismissed him habitually. "You know," he lowered his voice, "if you're in trouble, any kind of problem, I can help." There was something in his eyes that made Latricia uncomfortable. "Thank you, Marcus, but I can handle it." He nodded without looking away. "I just want you to be happy, Latricia. You deserve better than that." When he left, Latricia stared after him for a long time, trying to figure out what was behind his words. Did he know about her connection to Dexter? Did he suspect something? Or were they just words of encouragement from a co-worker who'd seen her unhappiness? She left work at 5 o'clock, citing a headache. On the way home, she stopped at the store, bought wine, candles, and groceries for dinner. Part of her wanted to create a romantic setting, while the other part of her screamed about how sacrilegious it was to have a romantic evening for a lover in her husband's house. At home, Latricia showered, put on new lingerie, bought especially for such meetings, and a light homemade dress. She arranged candles, opened wine, turned on some quiet music. And then she sat in an armchair and waited, looking at the clock and feeling how each minute stretched into infinity. At exactly 6 o'clock there was a knock at the door. Latricia flinched, though she had been expecting it. For a moment she wanted not to open it, to pretend that she was not at home, that this was all a mistake, a madness that had to end. But instead she got up, walked to the door, and opened it. Dexter stood on the threshold, handsome, confident, with the same cocky smile that had once turned her life upside down. He was holding a bouquet of flowers, modest, but even more touching. "For the most beautiful woman in River Creek," Dexter said, holding out the flowers to her. Latricia accepted the bouquet, feeling her heart beating hard. She silently stepped aside, letting Dexter into the house. As the door closed behind his back, the reality of what was happening hit her with renewed force. He was here, in her house, in the sheriff's house. "It's a beautiful house," Dexter remarked, looking around. "Cozy." Latricia watched him as he walked slowly through the living room, looking at the pictures on the walls, the knickknacks on the shelves, the details of the interior. He seemed out of place here, like an exotic animal that had suddenly found itself in an ordinary petting zoo. "Would you like some wine?" she asked, trying to break the tension in the air. "I'd love some," Dexter smiled, taking a seat on the couch. "I'd prefer something stronger, though. I'm sure your husband has some good whiskey." Latricia froze with the glass in her hand. The mention of Jarvis, so casual and casual, was like an electric shock. "Yes, there is," she said at last. "But I don't think—" "Relax." Dexter stood up and stepped close to her. "I was kidding. Wine is fine." He took the glass from her hand, set it aside, and pulled Latricia to him. His lips found hers, and for a moment all doubt vanished. All that remained was the two of them, and that hot, almost painful desire that burned Latricia from the inside out every time she was near him. Later, lying in bed, shrouded in the semi-darkness of the bedroom, Latricia smoked, a habit she'd given up years ago but had returned to with Dexter's entrance into her life. The ashtray she'd bought surreptitiously and kept hidden in the bottom drawer of her bedside table stood between them. Dexter lay with his hands behind his head, staring up at the ceiling. His profile, clear and expressive, loomed against the dimly lit wall. "What are you thinking about?" Latricia asked, watching the smoke rising from her cigarette. "About how strange everything has turned out," he answered without looking at her. If I hadn't been arrested that day, we never would have met. If you hadn't been arrested, you wouldn't have robbed that store, Latricia said, a hint of bitterness in her voice. Dexter turned to her. Do you believe I did it? Latricia lingered, buying time to answer. I've seen the proof, the videotape, the witness statements. And yet something makes you doubt it. He raised himself on his elbow, looking at her carefully. What is it, Latricia? Why are you with me if you think I'm a criminal? She looked away. I don't know. I feel like I'm truly living with you, for the first time in years. Dexter smiled and ran a finger along her exposed shoulder. Or maybe it's the fact that I'm a criminal that attracts you. Forbidden fruit is always sweet, isn't it? Latricia put out her cigarette, suddenly feeling irritated. Don't say that. It's not that simple. I think it's very simple. Dexter pulled her to him. You're unhappy in your marriage. I came into your life and offered you what you needed. Attention, passion, danger. You accepted because life is too short to waste on regrets. Latricia wanted to object, to say that it was more complicated, deeper, but she couldn't find the words. Maybe he was right. Could it really be that simple and trivial? A middle-aged woman, whose marriage has long since become routine, has an affair with a young criminal looking for a thrill. It's an old story, but there was something else about Dexter. Something she couldn't explain even to herself. Some depth hidden behind the mask of a self-righteous rebel. She'd seen it in his eyes when he'd talked about his childhood, about the dreams he'd never realized, about the books he'd read in his prison cell. Are you hungry? Dexter asked, interrupting her thoughts. I could cook something. I'm not a bad cook, you know. Latricia smiled as she pictured Dexter in her kitchen, in an apron working on the stove. Really, doesn't sound like you. There are a lot of things that aren't like me, but that I can do very well. He winked at her and got out of bed. Give me 10 minutes and I'll make a dinner that will make you forget all your doubts. He threw on a shirt and walked out of the bedroom. Latricia remained lying there, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds coming from the kitchen. The sound of water, the clatter of pots, the clinking of dishes, such ordinary domestic sounds that suddenly took on a strange, almost surreal tone when combined with the image of Dexter. She reached for a second cigarette, but the pack was empty. Sighing, Latricia stood up, put on her robe, and walked out of the bedroom. As she walked past the living room, she absent-mindedly corrected the photograph on the wall. The wedding photo of her and Jarvis, taken 23 years ago. They both looked so young, so happy, with eyes full of hopes and dreams. In the kitchen, Dexter was indeed working on the stove, deftly chopping vegetables and stirring something in a pot. An open bottle of red wine stood on the table beside him, 2 glasses already filled. I hope your husband doesn't notice the disappearance of a few tomatoes and half an onion, Dexter said without turning around. Though I doubt he even looks in the refrigerator. Jarvis is rarely home, and when he is, he doesn't care about the contents of the refrigerator. Latricia sat down in a chair, watching Dexter's actions. Where did you learn to cook? In prison, he answered simply. When I was serving my first sentence, an old man taught me. Said it would come in handy on the outside. Women love a man who can cook. Latricia listened to him, and again a wave of contradictory feelings rose inside. How could she feel such a strong attraction to a man who spoke so calmly about his prison terms? Dexter, as if sensing her mood, turned around. I'm not proud of my past, Latricia, but I'm not going to hide it. It's as much a part of me as your marriage is a part of you. He set a plate of pasta, which looked surprisingly appetizing, and a glass of wine in front of her. To us, he said, raising his glass. Here's to finding each other, despite all the obstacles. Latricia silently touched his glass with her own. They ate in silence, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock and Dexter's occasional comments about the dish. It was a strange, almost domestic idyll that seemed both right and hopelessly inappropriate to Latricia. After dinner, they returned to the bedroom, and Dexter made love to her again, tenderly, passionately, making her forget everything. When it was over, he lay beside her, ruffling her hair and humming a tune. What was that song? Latricia asked, feeling her eyelids grow heavy with fatigue and wine. It's an old blues song, Dexter answered. My mother used to sing it when I was little. One of the few memories I have of her. You never told me about your mother. There's nothing to tell. She left when I was 6. She chose drugs over her son. It's a common story for people like me. There was no bitterness in his voice, just a statement of fact, and it made Latricia feel even worse for him. "I'm sorry," she said, not knowing what else to say. "For what?" Dexter grinned. "You didn't abandon me or send me to foster homes or force me to steal to survive. But she stammered, unable to say what was running through her head. "But I'm betraying my husband with you. I'm violating every possible moral and ethical standard. I'm risking my reputation, my freedom for a few hours with you." "Nothing is your fault, Latricia." Dexter kissed her temple. "We're just looking for happiness like everyone else. Is that a crime?" Latricia didn't answer. Sleep came in waves, and she let herself succumb to it, feeling the warmth of Dexter's body beside her and not thinking about what would happen tomorrow. She was awakened by a sound, a sharp, loud one, shattering the silence of the bedroom. The sound of a key turning in the lock of the front door. Latricia sat up abruptly on the bed, sleep instantly drifting away. Dexter stirred next to her, also awakened by the noise. "What's that?" he asked hoarsely. "Jarvis," Latricia whispered, feeling the fear gripping her whole body. He had returned. For a moment they stood frozen, staring at each other with wide-open eyes. Then Dexter quickly jumped off the bed and began frantically gathering his clothes. Shit, he whispered. He wasn't supposed to be back this early. "He's in a meeting in the next county over." Latricia jumped up as well, pulling on her robe. "He couldn't—" At that moment, they heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. The sound was approaching the bedroom. "Latricia!" Jarvis's voice was tired. "Are you home?" Dexter, already half-dressed, froze. His eyes darted to the window, then to the bathroom door. "Go to the bathroom!" Latricia hissed. "Quickly!" He nodded, and grabbing the rest of his clothes, tiptoed into the bathroom adjoining the bedroom. The door closed quietly behind him, just as Jarvis knocked on the bedroom door. "Latricia, are you asleep?" She took a deep breath, trying to calm her frantically pounding heart, and opened the door. "Jarvis, what are you? I thought you were in a meeting." The sheriff was standing in the doorway, his face looking haggard, deep shadows under his eyes. The meeting was cancelled. He walked past her into the bedroom and sank heavily onto the edge of the bed. It's been postponed until next week, to be exact. There was something wrong with the paperwork. Latricia stood at the door, afraid to move. Her eyes darted to the bathroom door where Dexter was hiding. "You look tense," Jarvis said, looking at her carefully. "Is something wrong?" "No, it's just, I was asleep. You startled me." Jarvis nodded, then sniffed. "It smells." He frowned. "It smells like cigarettes." Latricia felt a chill run down her spine. I was smoking. I'm sorry." "You started smoking again?" The surprise in his voice was mixed with disapproval. "I thought you quit 10 years ago." "Sometimes, when I'm nervous," she shrugged, trying to look as casual as possible. Jarvis sniffed again. "And I think it smells like something else. Cooking?" "I made dinner," Latricia said quickly. "Pasta, would you like some?" "No, thanks, I'm not hungry." Jarvis stretched out on the bed without taking off his shoes. "God, I'm so tired. This new twist in the drug case. We found a connection to that convenience store robbery a month ago." Latricia froze. "Store robbery?" "Yeah, you remember that guy, Dexter Rochon? Turns out he was involved with drug dealers. We think the robbery was just a cover for a drug shipment." Latricia felt the ground slipping from under her feet. She slowly sank into the chair by the dressing table, trying not to show her shock. "Yeah, I didn't know." "Yeah, we just got that information today." Jarvis rubbed his eyes. "I need to find him, Latricia. He could be the key to unlocking the entire network." At that moment, there was a quiet sound from the bathroom. Something fell to the floor. Jarvis sat up abruptly on the bed. What was that? Something must have fallen. Latricia tried to smile, but her lips wouldn't do it. "You know how shaky things are up there." Jarvis frowned. "Is there someone there?" Before Latricia could answer, he was already on his feet and heading for the bathroom door. Latricia's heart seemed to stop. "Jarvis, wait." She tried to block his path, but he gently pulled her away. "What's going on, Latricia?" There was suspicion in his voice. "You're acting strange." "Nothing's going on, I'm just—" Jarvis opened the bathroom door and time seemed to slow down. Latricia watched his eyes widen, his hand instinctively reaching for the holster on his belt, his face contorted with shock and disbelief. Dexter stood in the middle of the bathroom with the expression of a hunted animal on his face. "Roshan?" Jarvis's voice was low, almost a whisper. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" There was a ringing silence. Latricia watched Dexter shift his gaze from her to Jarvis and back again, as if assessing the situation and weighing his options. "Sheriff," he said at last, his voice sounding unexpectedly calm. "I think you've already guessed." Jarvis turned slowly toward Latricia. There was so much pain in his eyes, so much disbelief, that she felt the pain physically, like a blow to the solar plexus. "Latricia?" Only one word, but it was a question, an accusation, a plea. "Jarvis, She didn't know what to say, how to explain what had no explanation. "How long has this been going on?" His voice was strangely calm, almost detached. "Not long," she replied, realizing how pathetic that sounded. It's just what?" Jarvis took a step toward her. "Just an affair. Just cheating. Just betraying everything we had." Dexter took advantage of the fact that Jarvis's attention had shifted to Latricia and made a move toward the door. But the sheriff instantly drew his gun. "Freeze, Roshan! One more step and I'll shoot!" Dexter froze, his eyes darting from Jarvis to Latricia. "Look, Sheriff, let's just talk this over calmly." "Calmly?" Jarvis let out a short, bitter laugh. "You're fucking my wife in my house and you want me to be calm." "Jarvis, please." Latricia took a step towards her husband, but he stopped her by raising his hand. "Don't come near me." His voice was so cold that Latricia stepped back involuntarily. "I don't even know who you are right now." There was a heavy pause. Jarvis, still holding the gun pointed at Dexter, pulled his cell phone out of his pocket. "I'm calling for backup. Roshan, you're under arrest for a bail violation." "What violation?" Dexter asked defiantly. "Sleeping with your wife? That's not a crime, Sheriff." "But associating with drug dealers is," Jarvis dialed the number, keeping his eyes on Dexter. "And killing witnesses is too." Latricia felt the blood drain from her face. "Murder? Dexter, what is he talking about?" Dexter didn't answer, but his gaze grew harder, colder. There was something frightening about the way he was changing from passionate lover to cold-blooded criminal. "Don't do anything stupid, Roshan," Jarvis said, holding the phone to his ear. "The only way out of this house is in handcuffs." It happened so fast that Latricia didn't even blink. Dexter lunged forward, knocking Jarvis to the ground. The gun fell out of the sheriff's hands and flew aside. The men rolled across the floor, exchanging blows. Latricia screamed, but it was as if her scream came from somewhere far away, from another reality. Jarvis, despite his fatigue, was a strong and trained police officer. He quickly got the upper hand, pinning Dexter to the floor and delivering blow after blow. "You thought you could just come into my house and fuck my wife?" Every word came with a punch. "Did you think I was going to let you get away with it?" Latricia rushed towards them, trying to pull Jarvis away. "Jarvis, stop! You're going to kill him!" "Maybe he deserves it," shouted the sheriff without stopping beating Dexter. At that moment, Dexter reached for a pistol lying nearby. Before anyone could react, a shot rang out. Jarvis froze, his eyes wide with surprise and pain. He slowly looked down to where a red stain was blurring on his shirt and shifted his gaze to Latricia. "Why?" Only one word before he collapsed to the floor. Latricia screamed, rushing towards her husband. Blood was quickly soaking through his shirt, spreading across the floor. "Jarvis! Oh my God, Jarvis!" She pressed her hands against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "Dexter, call an ambulance! Now!" But Dexter stood motionless, staring at the gun in his hand, as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. "Dexter!" Latricia screamed. "He's dying! Call for help!" Jarvis moved weakly, his eyes clouded over. "Latricia, why are you—" "Hush, hush!" She stroked his face, his hair, feeling the hot tears running down her cheeks. "It's going to be okay. Help is on the way." She turned to Dexter. "Why are you standing there? Call an ambulance." Dexter shook his head slowly. "I can't, Latricia. You realize I can't. I killed the sheriff. I'll go to prison for life, if not the death penalty." "He's still alive!" Latricia screamed. "We can save him! Dexter, please!" But Dexter didn't seem to hear her. He paced the room, muttering something to himself. "This changes everything. All the plans. We have to leave. We have to leave now." "What are you talking about?" Latricia didn't know what was going on. "What plans?" Jarvis squeezed her hand weakly. "Latricia, the phone, in his pocket." She quickly pulled the phone out of his pants pocket. The screen was shattered, but the device worked. She started to dial the ambulance when Dexter was suddenly at her side and snatched the phone out of her hands. "No," he said, and his voice was oddly calm. "No calls." "Dexter, what are you doing?" Latricia stared at him, not recognizing the man she'd made love to an hour ago. "He's dying." "I know." Dexter squatted down next to Jarvis, looking at him expressionlessly. "And that's a problem, Latricia, a big problem." Jarvis tried to say something, but there was a trickle of blood coming out of his mouth. His breathing was becoming hoarse and shallow. "Dexter, I'm begging you," Latricia cried, pressing her hands to her husband's wound. "Let's save him. We'll say it was an accident, that he hurt himself. We'll think of something." Dexter looked at her with a long, scrutinizing gaze. "And then what, Latricia? Do you think he'll forgive you? Forgive us? Do you really believe that?" "I don't know," she sobbed. "I just don't want him to die." "It's too late," Dexter said quietly. "He's already dying." And indeed, Jarvis's breathing was getting weaker and weaker. His eyes were closing. Latricia could feel the life draining out of him with every passing second. "No, no, no!" Latricia pressed her palm to Jarvis's lips, as if trying to hold the life in him. "Breathe, Jarvis, please breathe!" But the sheriff was no longer breathing. His eyes, wide open, stared at the ceiling, seeing nothing. Latricia felt something inside her shivering. The man she had lived with for 23 years, who had been the center of her world despite all the problems, lay dead in front of her. And it was because of her choices, because of her weakness. "He's dead," Dexter said quietly, as if stating the obvious. "Now we need to think about what to do next." Latricia looked up at him in horror. "What to do next? You just killed my husband!" "Our husband," Dexter corrected her, and something cold, almost cruel, flashed in his eyes. "You were in on it too, Latricia." "Me?" Her voice trailed off. "I didn't hold the gun! I didn't pull the trigger!" "But you brought me into this house," Dexter raised his voice. "You cheated on your husband, you lied to him, you created this situation. Or did you think you could just wash your hands of it and say it was all my fault?" Latricia couldn't believe her ears. The man she'd shared her bed with, the man she'd trusted with her innermost thoughts, had suddenly turned into a cold, calculating stranger. "I need to call the police," she said firmly, rising from the floor. "It was an accident, self-defense. Jarvis attacked you. And you expect them to believe that?" Dexter grinned bitterly. "A sheriff's wife and a known criminal having sex in the marital bed, and then... Oh, what a surprise. The sheriff is killed in self-defense." He stepped close to her, gun clutched in his hand. "Think, Latricia. Use your head. We need to get away. Get as far away from here as we can." "But I can't." She stepped back, feeling her legs shake. "My whole life is here. My work, my friends." "What friends?" Dexter snorted contemptuously. "That woman in the clerk's office who gossips about you behind your back? Or that deputy who looks at you with hungry eyes?" Latricia blinked, surprised by his observation. "Did you notice?" "Of course I noticed." He shook his head. "I always notice things like that. It helps me survive." She stared at him, and a new, frightening thought was brewing in her brain. "What Jarvis said, about the drug dealers, about killing witnesses, is it true?" Dexter didn't answer immediately. He stepped back to the window, looked out, checking to see if anyone was outside, and then turned to her. "Not everything your husband said was a lie, Latricia. I am indeed involved with some unpleasant people, but I didn't kill any witnesses. Others did." "Others?" Latricia felt a lump come up in her throat. "So you're really a criminal, and you thought I was in jail for stealing a lollipop from a store?" Dexter laughed, but there was no mirth in his laugh. "Of course I'm a criminal, and I'm not ashamed of it. There are only two kinds of people in this world, Latricia. Those who take and those from whom they take. I prefer to be the former." Latricia sank to the edge of the bed, feeling the world crumble around her. Everything she knew, everything she believed in, everything she thought was right and wrong, everything was upside down. "What are we going to do?" she whispered, staring at her husband's body lying on the floor in a pool of blood. "I have a plan." Dexter sat down beside her, taking her hand in his. "I always have a fallback plan, Latricia. I always do. I have money hidden in a safe place, papers to help us disappear. We can go to Mexico, Canada, wherever you want. Start a new life." "A new life?" Latricia repeated, as if in a trance. After you killed my husband. Look. Dexter took her face in his hands, forcing her to look into his eyes. What happened was awful. I understand that. But there are only two ways out of this now. Either we go to the police, and I get life and you get at least a few years for accessory after the fact, or we disappear and start over, together. Latricia looked into his eyes, dark, deep eyes in which she had once seen so much passion and tenderness. Now there was only cold determination in them. I can't, she said at last, breaking free of his arms. I can't just run away, Dexter. I have to call the police. She stood up and made her way to the phone on the bedside table. Dexter stared at her without moving, and something in his stillness made Latricia turn around. I'm sorry, he said, and there was a strange tenderness in his voice. I can't let you do this. And before she realized what was happening, he raised his gun and fired. The bullet hit Latricia in the chest, knocking her backward onto the bed. She didn't even have time to feel the pain, just surprise, just a strange sensation of lightness, as if she were falling from a great height. Dexter walked over to her, looked at the bloody stain on her robe, and something akin to regret flashed in his eyes. I'm sorry, Latricia, he said, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. But you left me no choice. You couldn't have lived with it anyway. I did you a favor. Latricia tried to say something, but only a wheeze escaped her throat. She could feel the life draining out of her as everything around her went dark. The last thing she saw was Dexter's face leaning over her. So beautiful, so cruel. The face of the man she'd lost everything for, her conscience, her marriage, her life. Dexter watched the light fade in her eyes as the last breath escaped her lips. When it was over, he gently closed her eyes and straightened, looking around the room. 2 bodies, a lot of blood, a mess that couldn't be hidden. He hadn't planned this. He'd come here for something else, for the information the sheriff's house could provide him, for a chance to find out how far the investigation had progressed. The connection to the sheriff's wife was just a convenient cover, a way to gain access to the house. He wasn't planning on killing anyone. But that's not how it went down. Dexter quickly searched the room for Jarvis's car keys, found them in his pants pocket. Then he went down to the kitchen, grabbed a rag and thoroughly wiped down every surface he touched. Doorknobs, table, chairs, faucet. He knew it was impossible to completely destroy the traces of his presence, but he could at least make the work of the forensics team more difficult. Finished, he took one last look around the house. A strange feeling came over him, a mixture of regret, fear, and some perverse satisfaction. He hadn't wanted to kill Latricia. She was a good woman, just confused by life, like so many. But she was a weak link, a risk he couldn't afford. Leaving the house, Dexter got into the sheriff's car and drove out of the yard. He knew he had a few hours at most before the bodies were discovered. Until then, he needed to get to the stash of money and documents and then disappear. Leave River Creek forever, this godforsaken town where everything had gone wrong. He turned on the radio to drown out his thoughts. An old blues tune blared from the speakers, the same one his mother used to sing. Dexter grinned at the grim irony of his fate, and he put on the gas. Ahead was the road, an open highway leading away from town, away from the 2 bodies cooling in the sheriff's house. At the intersection, Dexter slowed, wondering which way to turn. North or south? Canada or Mexico? New life or new lies? In the end, was there really any difference? He chose south, where it was warmer, where it was easier to get lost among others like him, running from their past.